Welcome back to another OwnLab tutorial. Today we're going to be talking about phase, phase correlation specifically, and we're just going to run this all through phase correlation meter training, I think that's what we're going to call this, okay? So we're going to explain exactly what this meter is, what it means when you see the things that you see, and what to do once you see the things that you see with this mysterious meter. We get a lot of questions about this, and we actually just got a request earlier today about what to do when there are phase correlation issues. So, without further ado, we'll just use a stock audio file of some kind here. How about just the word music? That sounds. I don't even have to preview it. I trust it. All right. So, set up a little loop region here. This is what our sample sounds like. Music. Okay. So, first, let's set up a correlation meter. And we'll talk just a little bit about what it is, where you can find it. It's a metering tool. Okay. So you're going to find it, and depending upon your DAW, it'll be in a different place, but you'll usually find it in the metering or utility or mastering or imaging folders, depending upon which program you happen to be using. Now, the correlation meter itself is incredibly simple, as you can see here. And there's really not much to it. You got a -1 on one side, +1 on the other, and 0 running right down the middle. And the correlation meter is actually going to also be found in other plugins, okay? Usually in mastering suite plugins, multimeters, that type of thing, okay? Now, here's how we read it. Usually, what you're doing with a correlation meter is putting it onto like your output or a bus or something like that, where you've got multiple pieces of audio routed, multiple audio signals. And what it's going to do is measure and report on the relationship of uh, phase correlation between different sounds. Okay. So the way that this works is that if it's all the way over here at +1, which it should be right now, and indeed it is, when it's all the way over there, that's perfect. You don't have to worry about it. When it's right in the middle, it's still fine. Believe it or not, it's still fine. It just means that you have a really wide mix. So that's actually something that we've been seeing more and more and more of in recent years as mixes have been getting wider and wider, and as people have become a bit more clever about how to use and process and arrange all their sounds to make that happen. So don't freak out if you're in the middle. You're actually doing really well. But anything below the middle, you probably should have some concerns. Okay, so if you flatten your mix down to mono, things most likely are either going to sound a little weird, or things are going to be missing completely. They'll just drop out completely. And we're going to show you exactly how this happens and what to do about it. Okay. So again, +1, awesome. -1, no good. And right down the middle, it's still fine. Okay. You just got a really wide mix. So first thing we're going to do is let's just bounce this in place. And the reason why I do this is twofold. Now, one of the things that we'll be doing is using a tool inside of the sample editor. Now, you usually want to make a copy of an audio file before you start editing it in a sample editor because usually it's a destructive um, technique. Okay, so it's actually altering the original audio file. So if you bounce it in place or make a duplicate, you should be fine. So that's why I do that. Now, we'll watch our correlation meter here as we play both of these sounds back. Music, music, music. Okay, now as expected, it is far to the right. It's +1 because these audio files should be identical or basically identical. One thing that you will notice though is that there's a big difference in decibel level between these two. The loudness of this is increased, and we'll take a look at those values right now. Music, music, music. Okay, so pretty significant difference, but that can be expected with stacking duplicate audio together. So, uh, how does phasing actually occur? Okay, well, through the wonders of modern technology, we're just going to bring up this image here, and you can see exactly what happens when the same uh, signal is stacked on to itself, and what happens when they are out of phase. And here in the middle, you can see exactly what happens when they cancel each other out and why. Okay, now a sine wave is an incredibly simple way to explain this. Um, there's no doubt about it. When there is uh, a signal and an exact opposite or inverted signal playing back together, you will hear nothing. Okay, now let's explain this mathematically. 1 plus 1 is 2. 1 plus 0 is 1. But 1 plus negative 1 is 0. Okay, and that's exactly what's happening here. When you're looking at an exact invert of an audio signal being stacked with the original, it cancels each other out. It's 1 plus negative 1 equals 0. And that's why you don't hear anything. Okay, so that's exactly what's happening. Now, let's run through what you can actually do in these situations and how to identify what the different types of correlation issues might be. Okay. First thing we'll do is we'll just disclose our toolbar here. Okay. And we do that to bring up our nudge tool. Okay. Because one of the easiest things to do if something is out of phase just a bit is to just nudge it a little bit. Okay. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to take a perfectly phased, okay, perfect phase alignment, and we're going to nudge it out of alignment. So you can actually hear what happens in real time as we do this. Okay. And maybe I'll even zoom in just a little bit more here so you can kind of see. Okay. Now, the only reason that this waveform up here is larger than this one is probably just because of the settings that I have set up for the normalization tool, which is used during the bounce in place process. So don't worry about that. Um, so I'm going to start playing this back. And I'm going to nudge it just a little bit. And you can see we're nudging it one tick at a time. So this is an incredibly small amount of difference being applied. Here we go. Music, 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 music. Oops, I'm sorry. I have them both selected. Rookie mistake. All right, so I'm just going to move the bottom one, okay? Our bounced in place version. Here we go. Music, 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 music. It's already starting to change, getting really boxy. Music, 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 music. Okay, so as you can hear, there are plenty of different results that come out of this, and none of them are really great. You get this kind of like chorusy, detuned, boxy, hollow effect, and it sucks, especially when you're trying to hunt down where this thing is coming from in a larger mix. But you may have noticed as we play this back again and we look at our meter, we're still over at the far right on our correlation meter. Okay, so it's going to sound bad, but it's not canceling each other out or anything like that. So you can't always look at a correlation meter and know for certain that the correlation of two sounds or more playing together are having a negative impact upon one another. It really does come down to listening to your mix really honestly, and being honest with yourself about the little things that you hear. And when you do start to hear things pop up, it's a process to find them. Sometimes it's easy with the correlation meter. If it starts running down to 0, you notice that there are things in there that are messing with your stereo imaging. And the larger your project, probably the closer to 0 you'll get, or further away from +1 you'll get anyway. So let's just do this. We'll go all the way back here. Okay, so we're back at the beginning. And now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to double click on our bounced in place version, our newer version. I'm going to click File here, and we're just going to go to Functions, and we're going to invert this, okay? So now that it's completely inverted, these two should be polar opposites of one another. Now what happens when, Let's see what happens when we play this back. Aha. So we don't hear anything. Hmm. Interesting. And that's because one is the opposite of the other, and one plus negative one equals zero. All right. So let's say you have a sound that is registering down here somewhere in the negative one area. Um, Maybe moving one of uh, the audio files in your arrangement is a good answer. Maybe, just maybe, you'll get a nice wide effect without any of the boxiness. Okay. Um, but more often than not, you'll probably need just a little bit more help than that. Okay. So, one easy way to deal with that is to open up a gain plugin, and that's usually found in your utility folder in most DAWs. And you'll see something similar to this. This is what you'll find inside of Logic. Each DAWs plugins vary a little bit. Okay. And I'm just going to click on a few buttons here so you can kind of hear what's happening, what exactly these parameters are. Okay, so phase invert left. And you can see that the correlation meter is all the way down to negative one here. We take off that inversion, it goes right back up to plus one. Okay, same exact thing happens when we invert the right. Okay, now we swap left and right. Nothing. Okay, perfectly fine. Mono sounds the same. Usually, you can solve a phase correlation problem of the simple variety with a gain plugin. Okay. Now, what else can you do to help prevent phase correlation issues? Um, okay. Well, here's a couple. Oftentimes, phase correlation issues pop up with live recorded elements in your music. Okay, so one way you can combat that is to use a phase EQ instead of a channel EQ, a basic EQ. Okay, now why is this different or how is this different? Well, most EQs, most basic EQs actually impart a little bit of phase issues as soon as you begin using them. So, a phase EQ actually helps to preserve the original integrity of the phase information um, in the original audio signal. Okay, so that's one thing. Another thing you can do is if you are actually recording your own elements for use in your own music, is to use the 3-to-1 rule. It's a 3-to-1 ratio rule. And this basically says that if you're going to be using two uh, capture points, or if you're going to be recording in stereo or using two or more microphones, use the 3-to-1 rule. So you place your microphone, say, a foot in front of an instrument or an amp or something. Well, then the other one needs to be placed 3 feet away from the first microphone. Okay, so it's a 3-to-1 ratio. So if the first mic had been placed 3 feet away from a speaker, for instance, then 9 feet away from that first microphone should be where your second microphone goes. Okay. And what that does is it just kind of mathematically helps you keep um, the proper amount of space between the two microphones, so there aren't issues with phase correlation from the very get. Okay, so working proactively is a great way to alleviate some of these things in the long run. So, what else can we tell you about correlation meters, how they work, and what you should do with what you see on them? There's not a whole lot. There will be some tools that like if you use a mastering suite like Isotope Ozone, for instance, there will actually be an option to rotate your stereo image and all sorts of things just to try and move things around. Now, let's talk about how you can hunt these problems down in a mix because, of course, the more sounds you have working together in tandem at once, you've got a lot of different possibilities as to where a correlation problem may be occurring initially, okay, or coming from. So, uh, first thing to do is just any duplicate tracks that you have. meaning the same sound being played on two different tracks, that could definitely be a big culprit. So you just want to listen to those two together, and toss a correlation meter on. Make sure that there aren't issues arising from that. If there are, then easy fix, great. You fix it and you move on, and it's done. If you have a lot of things happening in your music and you're having correlation issues on your meter and you're having a really tough time tracking down where it might be coming from, it actually could be coming from a plugin. So if you have any stereo imaging or positioning type of plugins, you might want to just toggle those off, bypass them, and see if that issue disappears. Because sometimes when you start messing with the stereo image of something, it can actually start messing with several other sounds in your mix just because, at the end of the day, there's only one frequency range. There's only one waveform that we can deliver to our ears. Okay. And along the way, you may have hundreds of different waveforms being smashed together. And our ears are really only going to hear the one. So, and we really need to keep that in mind when we're processing our sounds, positioning our sounds in the stereo field, um, where we're using things in our arrangement, how we happen to EQ things, that type of stuff. So every little bit counts. So even if you're just getting some boxiness or some hollowness or some, detuned effect from two similar sounds or two sounds that share a lot of the same frequency information, you can even fix a lot of that just with an EQ tool. Okay, so and again, maybe just shifting them just a tick or two or five in your arrangement could solve the problem. You heard how quickly we went from perfect to boxy when we moved just a couple of ticks with these two pieces of audio. So if you are getting that effect, you can just nudge them in one direction or the other, and perhaps find the proper alignment, and you'll achieve that quote unquote perfect sound again. Um, so that's it in a nutshell, folks. A correlation meter, although very, very simple, um, can be rather complex once you actually start getting into the hows, whys, whens, wheres of hunting down issues. Once a correlation meter lets you know that there is an issue, and just as likely, when you're encountering problems in your mix, a correlation meter can show you that there is no problem, but your ears will tell you that there is. Remember that we saw our correlation meter registering up at +1, and yet the sound was pretty terrible. It was pretty boxy. It was pretty detuned. So use your ears. Don't just use your eyes. But the correlation meter is a great visual tool to key you in to existing problems. So there you go. Hope it helps. Hope you understand the correlation meter just a little bit better. Um, and always, always, always make sure that you check your mixes to avoid phase cancellation. Don't want your sounds disappearing altogether. Thanks for tuning in, folks. As always, if you have feedback for this tutorial or requests for upcoming tutorials, leave us a comment below, shoot us an email, or visit one of our many social profiles around the World Wide Web. It's always great to see you here, and we'll see you again soon. Cheers.